Thank you, Jim.
You're welcome.
Good morning. Dr. Evans, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Dr. Blanton,
Present.
Dr. Bullock, Dr. Dempsey,
Present.
Dr. Fleming.
Present.
Thank you. Ms. Janeski, Dr. Graham, Dr. Houston, Dr. Locklear.
Here.
Dr. Marr, Dr. Miller,
Present.
Dr. Penfield,
Here.
Superintendent Truitt,
Here.
Ms. Floyd, Dr. Holland,
Here.
Dr. Weddington,
Here.
Dr. Wood,
Present.
Mr. Smith,
Present.
Mr. Patton. We have quorum.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Kim, Sam Houston's here.
Thank you, Dr. Houston.
So good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome commission members, advisors, staff, on-site visitors, and online listeners to the December 9th, 2021 monthly meeting of the North Carolina Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission. This commission develops and recommends to the State Board of Education rules related to all aspects of educator preparation programs and licensure. My name is Patrick Miller, and I'm the chairman of the Professional Educator Prep and Standards Commission. I now call this meeting to order. Our agenda and materials are available online through the DPI website, www.ncpublicschools.org, on the SBE meetings link. The meeting is also audio streamed through a link located at the bottom of the eBoard agenda. I will now read the ethics statement that is required of us. Commission members are reminded that it is our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this commission. Does any member of the commission know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. If, during the course of the meeting, you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. Commission members, you have had an opportunity to review the proposed agenda for today's meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda for the December 9th, 2021 meeting?
So
Move to
moved,
approve.
Connie.
This is, Randy, second.
Thank you. Have a motion and a second to approve the agenda for today's meeting. Any further discussion? Hearing none, those in favor of approval, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. The agenda is approved. Thank you. The minutes from our previous commission meeting on November 18th, 2021 have been prepared and made available to you. Do I have a motion to approve these minutes?
So moved.
Thank you, Van. And a second from Dr. Houston. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, those in favor of approval, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? The minutes have been approved. Thank you. Now, Drs. Evans and Tomberlin will present the NCDPI and State Board updates.
Thank you, Chairman Miller. The first update is for LICN 003. Last month, we approved vendor updates for the 4 tests, the chemistry test, the professional school counselor test, the library media specialist test, and the physics test, and also the reading subtest recommendation that was that ended up being the Foundations of Reading Test 190, and that went for action on first reading during the December State Board meeting, and it was unanimously approved by the State Board. And it is now updated on their policy website for LICN 003. So I just wanted to give that update. And now Dr. Tomberlin will provide 2 updates. Let me just share my screen quickly.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. So the first update is for a job description for school mental health clinician. This is actually a classified position and does not require a State Board of Education license. So that's why it did not come to Pepsi initially, but we wanted to make everyone aware that this is still under discussion with the State Board of Education. I will relate to you the issues of concern. This is to provide therapeutic services in the school setting. And so we are leveraging occupational licenses that allow for clinical services, therapeutic services to students. Those license areas are listed within the job description. And then we have recommended a salary range to the State Board of Education, and that's salary grade 71. Initially, when we brought this, we truncated that salary grade on the high end, indicating that that fully licensed candidates would earn a minimum of $56,000 a year. That received a lot of pushback from professional organizations. For school psychologists and school counselors who do hold State Board of Education licenses, and that put this classified position around the midpoint of that salary schedule. And so there's some concerns about equity. And so to address this, we have stricken the minimum requirements and just allowed that salary grade. We recommended that salary grade to the board so that the districts can position the employee anywhere along that range, depending on their own market conditions and what it might cost, what they might have to offer to attract a viable candidate. That salary range ranges from about $3,200 a month to $6,000 a month. So that's quite a wide range to give the districts flexibility to hire the personnel they need. I'm happy to take any questions from the commission on this issue, but it was not something that came formally through Pepsi. We're just making you aware of what's being presented to the board.
Hey, Tom, this is Hank. At the beginning of it where it says the credentials needed, so we have a huge counseling program, mental health counseling. I guess I got a couple of questions. One is, how many of these positions do we see happening? Is this a per school kind of thing, or a couple in each district? And then the second question is, it says 2 years of experience. So all of our KCREP institutions, students who graduate and get licensed as an associate, as they come out, will have had a year and a half of clinical residency between their practicum and internships. Would that count towards the 2 years of therapy experience as they come out, or is it after that?
You're asking about the State Board licensed personnel, so like their school counselors and the school psychologists?
No, I'm talking about for this particular position. So I've got somebody coming out as a mental health clinical counselor, right? And they're finishing their master's degrees. They'll come out as a licensed associate right out, and they'll have had a year and a half of clinical work during their time. Would that count towards the 2 years of clinical therapy experience, or is it post-graduation?
I see your question. So because these are not State Board of Education licensed positions, we assign a salary grade to them, and the LEAs have, or the employer has discretion of where to position the candidate along that salary continuum based on their qualifications and their experience. But it does not have a step and lane process like a State Board of Education license, like the teacher salary scale. So you don't automatically move up every year of experience. It is much more under the discretion of the employer to position that person and offer any raises that they need to. So we don't get, that is not prescribed in policy for classified positions.
Right. I guess I'm more interested in the entry point. So minimum qualifications, you have to have your master's degree. So somebody that finishes with a master's degree will have technically a year and a half of clinical experience as they come out. Does that mean they only need one more half year of therapy experience to get one of these positions? Or do they have 2 more years after they complete?
So the candidate could be hired with a provisional license. So my understanding is when these folks complete the master's degree, that they can be provisionally licensed, but they have to operate under the supervision of a fully licensed therapist. So they could be provisionally licensed and employed with that provisional license. They, of course, would have to take care of their supervision, or the district would have to work with them to provide supervision. But yes, they could function in the role. The question as to does the year and a half internship count towards their requirement to complete, to be fully licensed? I would imagine so, but that's more of a question for the occupational licensing board from which they hold their occupational license, not us. Does that make sense?
That does. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Other questions? Hearing none. Next update.
So our next update concerns the principal licensure waiver and potential recommendations for changes in statute to the principal licensure process. So I would refer you back to 115C284. We've discussed this before. The statutory requirements for principal licensure that have not been implemented for around a decade within the preparation programs and within the agency in terms of the licensure. And so we have come to understand of our lack of compliance there. And so we worked with the General Assembly to create a waiver from these policies for both sitting principals or principals who have been licensed prior to July 1st, 2021, and to provide a waiver for those teachers or those candidates who are currently enrolled in our programs, provided the candidate completes at least one course towards a master's degree or a postmaster's certificate by August 31st, 2022. So the concern is that once this waiver expires with that August 31st, 2022 deadline, we will revert to the requirements in the law. And so I've had a discussion with the State Board of Education about the need for ensuring that the statute conforms with what the State Board of Education and what the field needs in terms of licensing principles appropriately. And so there are 4 major areas that we're working on with the field to bring recommendations to you for recommending statutory changes to the General Assembly. So Kim, if you go to the next slide. So we are in the process of gathering feedback from the field. I can tell you how that's happening. I am working with our teacher recruitment and retention task force, which is made up of HR directors and superintendents from the 8 educational regions in the state. Dr. Seiberg is working with INCACTI, which is the professional organization for teacher education. Mr. Tabari Wallace, the superintendent's principal advisor, is working with a group of principals and other folks related to principal education. NC Papa is in that group, and gathering feedback from principals on how this should look. And there are four main areas that we're looking at. First, the licensure exam. Does the state board believe that a licensure exam is essential for licensing of principals? And if so, what test would that be? And if not, what other measures might we use to ensure that our candidates have been adequately prepared for the role? Next is a year-long internship. Current legislation requires a 10-month internship for principal licensure candidates. Should we also create an equivalent internship period that's defined by hours, because some of our folks are not in the position where they can work full-time in the 10-month, and if we had an hourly equivalent, that would allow them to do this on a more part-time basis. And to that question as well, should the internship period, either monthly or hourly, be the same for our part-time MSA completers as it is for our full-time completers? Next, teaching experience. The current statute does limit the principal license to those folks who hold a teaching license. And that's opposed to instructional support licenses like our school counselors, school social workers, and other roles. So should the principal licensure require a teaching license to the exclusion of all other licenses? And is there a minimum number of years of teaching experience that one must possess in order to hold the principal license? The current legislation says 4. So we're working on whether that's the right number, as well as do we recommend a change in the law that would allow instructional support folks who do not have teaching experience to pursue the principalship. And then finally, Masters of School Administration. The law restricts the license to those folks who hold an MSA specifically. And so that has impact on our licensure only programs across the state. Licensure only accounts for 1/3 of the program completers that we see in the state every year. So this is a large part of the principal pipeline. The current law would not allow for a licensure only process. So should the legislation recommend the ability for an individual to do licensure only? If they hold a master's in some other area, they're doing licensure only, or do we stipulate that a person must hold a master's of school administration in order to hold the principal license? So those are the 4 main areas that we're soliciting feedback from these groups on. We are currently in the process. We've started that process, and in the very near future, we'll be coming back to you with recommendations for statutory changes that you would vote on and recommend to the State Board of Education.
Any questions for Dr. Tomlin? All right, thanks. Is that the last update, Dr. Tomlin?
I think
That is the last update.
All right, well, thank you, Dr. Evans and Dr. Tomlin. Next up, Dr. Seiberg will present a policy amendment to TCED-004, which is EPP approval process and peer review process for discussion and potential action. Dr. Seiberg.
Good morning, Commission members. In accordance with 115C-269.10, the State Board of Education needs to adopt rules for granting approval or, as they define it, initial authorization to EPPs that are interested in operating in North Carolina. Now, to date, we've been operating using procedures we've had in place for some time now, but they've not ever been put into formal rules. So that's what we're doing here. The policy language that you see in TCED 004 is language to design is designed to capture as much as we can the procedures that we've had in place. And putting this language into the policy is essentially the first step to preparing to convert them into formal rules to be in compliance with what the law is asking us to have in place. And essentially, the language that you're seeing in TCED 004 was developed with the support from the board legal department to make sure that it's adequately aligned with the rule writing requirements. So the big change from the current procedure that we've had in place to what you're seeing in TCED 004 is in the area of the peer review process. Historically, what we've done is used reviewers within North Carolina that were nationally accredited, that had national accreditation review experience. And they did that out of the goodness of their heart. And what you're seeing here is instead of using reviewers in North Carolina as peer reviewers, the legal department cautioned against doing that going forward. As the process in general there's inherently a potential conflict of interest for leveraging folks within the state to do that process. So under these rules, the EPP applicant must use reviewers that the department has in place that will be outside North Carolina to examine the application and then attest that it is in line with North Carolina policy and law prior to submission to the board for formal approval. The department still intends to use folks with national accreditation review experience as we've done for some time now in that peer review. The difference here is now the applicant is going to have to incur a fee to pay those folks to do the reviews because we don't have the infrastructure outside of the state to find folks to do this out of the goodness of their heart. So there'll be a small fee associated with that based on the hours of time that the reviewers need to do the review. And then similar to the process we've used in the past, the peer review attestation is essentially a green light to move the application to the board so that the board can review it and consider it for formal approval at that time. So all of the remaining structures are similar to what has been in place to date. And that's the sort of the rundown of the language associated with TCED 004.
All right. Any questions for Dr. Seiberg?
Hey, this is Ann. I have quite a few questions.
Okay.
Thank you, Patrick. The first question, Andrew, good morning, is
Morning.
You talked about a potential conflict of interest with internal evaluations in the state of North Carolina or internal reviews, right?
Yes.
So can you explain to me how this would be different than nursing? Because the state board for nursing approves programs and they also review new programs. So can you explain how in education, we're saying we're out of compliance and it can be a conflict of interest where something like nursing, which is also a professional license, does an internal review and the board, the nursing board. I know this would go to state board, so that part's the same, but they also do an internal review in that. So how is this, I don't understand why this needs to go outside of North Carolina when another professional license does not in North Carolina.
So I would have to do some initial investigation, but I would suggest that maybe I think Allison is on the call here. Perhaps she could weigh in from the legal perspective as to the thinking behind that. But without her sharing either way, I'd have to scratch around to see if I can understand and come up with an educated response for you.
This is Allison. I'll be happy to comment. This came up in the context of discussing a community college approval for this, and that there might be a conflict of interest if people perceived other programs to be competitors to their own programs. And so that was the conversation. that there might be that might be perceived to be a conflict of interest if a program were denied, and one way to deal with it. Well, this is what the licensure folks came up as a way to deal with that concern, but there is a potential perception and possible actual conflict of interest.
So, okay, I'll go back to my, thank you, Allison. I'll go back to my example. Nursing has community college programs and also four-year programs that all meet the same standards, right? Because the RN standards. So to me, this is saying that the people that have been, that there seems to be a perception of conflict of interest on the reviewers. Is that what you're saying, that have reviewed so far?
And it also might be a difficult position to put the reviewers in if their institutions were not happy with a specific program being approved that might be in competition. So it was not just about the individuals, it was about the place it puts them to ask them to consider a potential competitor.
But every review is a potential competitor. Every review. So I caution that you're stating that, speaking about ethics of reviewers, and I think that's a really dangerous place to go.
I understand that. I don't know what other programs are out there. When I was asked to address this issue, it was, I think, a concern that it would put the reviewers in a difficult position, not necessarily question their integrity. One way to go about it, which might be different, is if you had people who had been previously employed by EPPs but are not currently employed, so retired folks or people who have experience in this area in the state. And that might address your concerns to some extent. But again, that was my best advice, was we need to be careful to avoid an appearance of impropriety or conflict, and there are national people who are qualified to do this and do it nationally all the time. So there is a pool of other people to rely on that can be asked to do this work.
How do you ensure that the people that are outside of North Carolina do not have a conflict of interest in any way?
Well, this is preparing North Carolina teachers in North Carolina.
Still, how is that ensured?
We would have to have a station of some sort that there would be no potential conflict of interest.
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand what you said.
You see there's an attestation there, and it's on the screen now. Part of this rule is that person would have to attest to their lack of their conflict of interest issues, or lack thereof.
I also don't see anything in here, thank you, Andrew, about how many times someone could apply. I don't know if that goes in rules. If there is a limit to the number of times someone could submit an application, is there a limit to how many, who picks the folks? What if some are approved, some would not? So I think and I don't know if that would go in this level of policy. So could you address that, please? Do you understand my question?
Dr. Seiberg, are you out there?
I am. I thought that was directed at Allison. I'm sorry about that.
You, sorry.
Yeah. So
if Allison wants to answer it, so
yeah. So one of the things is we want to maintain the list here at the department, and the reason for that is we don't want the applicants to be able to essentially doctor shop for folks that they know across the country that have the qualifications that we're looking for. And so the idea would be to have a stable of folks both from AQUEP and CAPE that have experience in the recent past doing a national accreditation review as a qualifier for them to be in that stable. And then we will prepare those folks with some preparatory meetings to help them understand the policies and laws associated with the process. And then it's at the applicant's process to gather three folks within that cadre to do the attestation. Does that make sense?
I don't agree with it, but your explanation makes sense. I don't agree with it because I don't understand why they would be picking the people. I still think that is a problem. I don't understand why, quote, you wouldn't be picking the people, you know, like be picking the reviewers and go down the list and cycle it through. And I don't understand, I don't understand what the process would be from three separate pieces when, three separate people when the, when national accreditation teams are teams, if that makes sense.
Well, I think historically, what we're trying to maintain here is the idea of a tiebreaker, right? That we don't want one particular person to be in the process of that review. And I think the second thing here is, you know, what we're asking these folks to do is not a formal review process as if they were doing a national accreditation review. This is really about an attestation that they have things in place for initial authorization. They're two totally different things. What we're trying to do is greenlight them to start a process here. And so the process, the reason I'm choosing, the reason that we're trying to stay with the nationally accredited reviewers is because they have experience in this kind of work. And obviously this is a different ask than doing a formal review, sort of apples and oranges there. But we're trying to maintain the quality of the reviewer candidate pool as best we can, and that was the decision that was made, was to try and maintain the nationally accredited folks to do that review process.
Yeah, I appreciate that answer, Andrew.
Sure.
I think that there's some things in there that need to be processed out. I would also like to just clarify for this group that when people go through a national accreditation in the state of North Carolina, there is no state representative that comes anymore. And we're taking a process of approving EPPs out of state. But if my EPP goes through a national visit, which it will in the spring, there is no state representative that comes to that visit. So this seems to also be a conflict. I just have a lot of issues with this in the way that we are farming out something to the outside of North Carolina when the EPPs in North Carolina do not even have, I mean, we can call and they can ask a question. I don't want to say that Andrew's not available, but we don't have anyone that comes and represents the state for the state approved EPPs at this point. And we're moving to an external state, are asking to be moved to an external state review based on the fact that it could be a conflict of interest. I just have major issues with the way this is laid out and the way this seems, the context of this and the way it came as based on what Allison nicely explained. I don't have any further questions at this time, Patrick. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Anyone else?
Hi, Patrick, this is Michael. Can I ask 2 questions?
Absolutely.
So I tend to agree with Ann here. So Andrew, this process has been in place for some time now, correct?
Yes, procedurally, yes.
Okay, so several years we've used the process as it's currently outlined. And the folks that are doing the reviews, some of those folks are in fact national reviewers, correct?
They all have experience in reviewing at that level, yes.
Yeah. So to me, I agree with Ann. I think this eats a little bit at the professionalism of folks inside of this state. They are attesting to the conflict of interest statement. They're not operating as an agent of their EPP. They are, in essence, operating as an agent of the state, right?
Within the context of this ask, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So to me, yeah, I also have a problem with saying we can't, in essence, we can't trust faculty and administrators from inside EPPs, inside of North Carolina, who've been doing this process without any evidence of conflicts of interest, without any evidence that they've in fact denied programs for personal reasons. I don't understand why we have to go out of state for this. It doesn't feel right to me either. So that's it for me. Thanks.
Dr. Miller, could I offer a comment, please?
You may.
This is Catherine. Andrew, I want to be clear with everyone. Did this issue or this request emanate from the reviewers themselves or not?
So the point at which this brought up, this issue was brought up at the initial discussion around the community college application, which is in the works, that the reviewers had some concerns about this. And that's what caused me to bring it to board legal to think about this. And obviously from their perspective, they had some concerns about the perception of making a decision given its political charged potential. And so when I brought it to legal, this was the best choice that we made based off of the perceived challenges associated with maintaining a peer review in North Carolina, and also to remedy the solution with an equally rigorous process, using peer candidates for that process as best we could. Yes, they would be outside the state, but that was the best plan B that we had in place.
Thank you so much. I just, whatever our feelings are about why we should or should not do this, I just want to be very clear that this did not originate due to lack of confidence in the reviewers.
Oh, no, definitely not.
Thank you, Catherine. This is Ann, for asking that question. However, I really appreciate that, and I really appreciate your advocacy on that. So I want to say that we used to have something called a state evaluation committee with reps from publics, privates, and non-HE, IHE, EVPs, I don't know which ones, but, people that are kind of standalone. And I wonder if a better idea might be to just flesh out the system we have and make it a bit more, maybe I'll use the word transparent, and if that would work. So Andrew, I don't know if you were here in this role when that happened.
That was, I am aware of that process, and that same team it was back when the department had a much larger staff, and that crew also was responsible for running around and doing face-to-face visits for renewals and that sort of thing. So I am familiar with that from a historical perspective.
So I just wonder, I'm totally against, I don't believe that the state of North Carolina is saying we have to go outside. I believe this is presented as a solution to a perceived conflict of interest, right? Or that's the way it was presented in my language to me this morning. So I wonder if we could go back and think about maybe to a process that used to be, which was an ad hoc committee, right? It was an ad hoc committee, or whatever you want to call it. I'm using the word ad hoc generally here. So I don't like the idea that this gives the perception that we don't trust the state of North Carolina to do state of North Carolina business.
This is Allison Schaefer. I don't think it's as strict as you interpret it. It allows us to go out of state. I'm not sure the policy requires us to go to state. Tom, could you address that?
There we go. Unmute myself. Mr. Chair, the current policy proposes that the Office of Educator Preparation will maintain a list of reviewers. There's no requirement in the policy that any particular reviewers be assigned to any particular application. The EPP would select the reviewers it wanted from the list of reviewers maintained by the office. And so it's not as exclusive as had been perceived. There is no requirement that the people be from out of state unless the list doesn't have any in-state people on it. I don't know how the list is going to be put together. But it's currently not an exclusion. Does that make sense?
It was presented as such, though, correct?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was in another meeting when this first came up, and it's not in the policy as drafted.
I would thank you. This is Ann. I would like for us to think about looking back at I don't know how looking back at a state evaluation committee would be any more work or effort than doing this.
Okay, so if you go to an evaluation committee, then that committee will be a state public body.
That's right.
Which will then have to comply with open meetings and conduct all of its business it would have to comply with open meetings, including notice of all of its hearings, public attendance, et cetera, everything that goes with open meetings. It'll be fully transparent and might hinder the free exchange of information that I think you want to enhance at the professional review level. But it is certainly a way to do things. Certainly open meetings and public bodies are the way a great deal of state business is conducted. But the way this policy is set up is that there were 3 independent reviewers who conducted independent review and submit their attestations. It doesn't prevent them from consulting with each other or prevent them from having meetings, but they are not required to hold public meetings with minutes and motions and decisions by vote. And does that make sense? Do you see the difference between the 2 approaches?
I do. I appreciate that explanation. Thank you very much.
Dr. Tomberlin?
Thank you, Chairman Miller. So I just want to address the issue that seems to be recurring, that this is some kind of expression of a lack of confidence or a lack of trust in the integrity of the reviewers that we've had heretofore. And that is patently untrue. And I don't think is helpful in this conversation. Clearly, the agency had tremendous trust in these reviewers. This was precipitated by those reviewers' concerns that their decisions related to this particular application would be perceived as politically or self-interest, motivated by self-interest. The whole situation is an effort to protect the folks that could be perceived, not that they do have a conflict of interest, but they have the appearance of a conflict of interest. We are very transparent with these processes. These notes and these reviews would and should be open to public scrutiny if it were required. And we're recognizing as the state agency that this process has the potential to put these reviewers at risk who are doing this work on a pro bono basis. So I just want to make it very clear that the agency is not moving to disparage or to besmirch the reputation of anybody who was involved in this process. We are responding to their own concerns about what their feedback, how it might be perceived, and how they might be personally attacked by those perceptions.
This is Ann again. I hope somebody else has some comments, but I appreciate that, Tom. I appreciate those comments about my colleagues, because we take our work very seriously in EPPs, as you should know, and I believe most people on this call do know. And I'm just speaking as a representative for many people across the state this morning that are very upset that this process could be taken externally without thinking of ways to fix it within our own state and handle our own business. So I think that's it. I think that if I had to sum up what the feelings, the emails and the text and the calls that I've gotten since this agenda came out have to do with that. I'll be quiet now, Patrick. I promise, maybe.
You're good. I won't hold you to that promise. Anyone else?
Patrick, this is Van. Can I ask Tom, just to make sure I understand the element of this? Tom, without the concern being pinned to any particular individual, the concern in the abstract is that if you have reviewers from North Carolina institutions looking at potential new programs at other North Carolina institutions, there may be a concern that I don't want a competitor coming into the market, and so I'm going to deny this application or this approval.
So, yes, but let me clarify why I think that's a concern. It's not that we feel like that concern would be the overriding factor in any review, North Carolina EPP reviewers' decision. What we're concerned about is publicly that specter of conflict of interest could be raised publicly, politically, through the media. We cannot shield anyone from the implications that others might make of what the motivations of the reviewer were. And so an effort, I can't shield those reviewers either by hiding them behind some anonymity and saying we're not going to tell you who those reviewers are. We would have to publicly disclose that information, and then anybody could make whatever allegations they want about what those motivations were, to the detriment of that reviewer. So by removing it from the process, from the state and anybody who has a perceived conflict of interest, we're trying to avoid that potential risk and say these folks have no interest in this game, in this market in the state of North Carolina. How could they be motivated by self-interest? That's the overriding purpose of trying to do this.
Right. Yeah, thank you for that. And I appreciate the way you framed the nature of the concern that this language attempts to address. I'm sort of going back to the first few minutes that Ann made her points. It seems to me, in part, this can be addressed by having balance. I think there is it actually enhances the process if there is a person from outside the state who's participating. They don't have an institutional, well, the assumption is they would not have an institutional dog in the hunt, so to speak. And then we also have internal people who can address, they have a different lens if they're coming internally. But the whole thing is premised on a process that people are down to the point of having a signed, notarized document, that there's got to be a good faith commitment to the process. And so if we start to peel back all of these reasons that we might not trust a particular decision or a particular reviewer, we're not going to have any reviewers. And the three, I was thinking as Ann was talking, there are three similar kinds of processes. One is CAPE, and the second is within the university representatives, the promotion and tenure process when you have external reviewers. So you have this balance of you've got people in the institution and you have these external folks from around the country or the world who are contributing reviews. The third one is, I'll say this for the UNC system, the process of getting program approval to offer a new program in the UNC system is fraught with this kind of potential. But there's got to be some kind of lot of confidence and good faith that while there could be mischief in the process, that we've got to build in and then have confidence in the structure. So, Ann, I think I'm agreeing with you with the addition that a balance of in-state and external reviewers might accomplish the concern that Tom just explained.
If I may, everyone, real quick, need to just interject some housekeeping. Our live streaming will end at 10. There's another meeting, state meeting, that starts at 10. And that's fine. We can continue beyond 10. Just for the people listening, the remainder of the meeting will be recorded and posted later. And now back to the regularly scheduled program.
This is Allison. Can I make a more explicit comment about what led to the concerns?
Yes, ma'am.
There was an attempt to get the community college proposal reviewed, and those reviewers that were asked to do this, and it was voluntary, we did not have folks that were willing to do that review unless their identities could be protected and they could do so anonymously, which we cannot do consistent with our state open records laws. So that was the catalyst for considering how to address the concerns that folks did not want their names associated with that review. And that's as explicit as I think that's what started all this conversation is how can we can't make that promise, therefore we can't have in-state reviewers if they're not willing to come forward. And it was that specific.
This is Ann. I would say that's not truly an accurate statement based on my experience with this process. Not that I'm saying you're not saying what you believe to be the truth, Allison, but I think there's more to this story. So and to go back to Van, I would say that I don't disagree with having an external person or someone as part of the group, but to not totally farm this out to an outside of North Carolina, I believe is, it's just not good for our business. So I said I wouldn't speak anymore, but I did.
I guess the concern is if no one is willing to do this voluntarily.
The review did happen.
Okay, well, I'm not familiar with all the facts. That's what I had in front of me.
I don't believe that the review in question is complete.
That would be an Andrew response, I believe.
Yeah, so the community college system proposal was sent to our internal within North Carolina review team, and they had one rotation on it. And in the discussion of that initial rotation, there were some concerns voiced about the proposal, as well as the concerns about the political dynamics associated with that application in general. So so I would say yes, an application review, the process was started. It was not, it was not a completed process because the concerns that were voiced to me is what caused me to head down the path of seeking legal counsel on how to proceed in all the things that we've discussed at this point.
Other comments? So what is the pleasure of the commission at this point?
I would like for my nursing questions to be answered, please, and to maybe come back with some ideas about how we could handle this with the balance within the state of North Carolina, and maybe looking toward I'm just going to call it the state evaluation team model. I don't know if that's the exact name of what that group was. I'm pretty sure it was, but and see where that is in rules, laws, policies, etc.
All right, now I'm going to put the burden on you, Dr. Bullock. I need that in the form of a motion, please.
I'd like to make a motion that we table this until we provided more information regarding this versus the nursing process in North Carolina, nursing licensure process, and an option of looking at a more of a balanced approach that would include internal North Carolina people and a more transparent process brought forth.
All right, Dr. Bullock has made a motion. Is there a second out there?
Second. Oh, this is Randy.
Thank you, Randy. All right, we have a motion and a second, and I'm not going to attempt to restate Dr. Bullock's motion. I think everyone heard it. Those that are in favor of taking a little more time to further tease this out, please say aye.
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 Is there anyone opposed? Okay. Great. So at this point, thank you, Dr. Seiberg, for that. And now we're going to move into, in our last 3 minutes, try to be brief. And if not, it's okay. We can post the recording later. But the co-chairs for our 4 subcommittees will provide an update on their work. And we'll start with prep and entry, Drs. Dempsey and Whittington.
Thank you. I'll start and then Hank jump in if you need to add anything. We are in the process and we're moving pretty assertively in a transition from a conversation that has been primarily about credentials to a conversation that's more driven by creating frameworks around professional competency at each one of the license levels. We're looking at that in terms of what evidence of the application of the knowledge base, in essence, what does the practice of the license look like, and then the evidence of impact, in essence, on student learners. We are using NTask as the driving and framing language of that process. We're trying to get a handle on what the minimum expectations for that application and impact would be at each one of the licensure levels. And then how do we use the language of NTask and the framing of the pathways to create a progression model as people move through the pathways and into the advanced license levels 5 and 6. Hank, I think that was 30 seconds of where we are.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions? Hearing none, we'll move into licensure with Dr. Bullock and Dr. Wood.
Hey, Dr. Bullock and I met with our licensure subcommittee on November the 19th. At that meeting, we reviewed 6 possible measures that the subcommittee would be recommending to the commission as a whole that could be used in the licensure pathway model to measure the credentials that the other subcommittees will be determining. And with each one of those recommendations, we have a list of pros, cons, and things to consider as we work together in the future. And Dr. Bullock, if you have any additional information, feel free to jump in.
That was perfect, Wesley. Thank you.
All right, and any questions? Hearing none, we will move into advancement and development, Dr. Marr and Mrs. Stover.
Hi, this is Maureen. Dr. Maher, if you have anything you wanted to add, please do. We did meet with our subcommittee at the beginning of November, and we came up with a pretty much fully fleshed out list of the competencies that we'll be looking at to move between each one of the licensure levels. We also had an opportunity to present some of our initial work at the AIM conference, and at the Innovation Lab. And we did get some good feedback from both of those that we will be taking into consideration as we finalize our list of competencies and begin to work with DPI to get our final project done.
Right. Any questions? Hearing none, we'll move into budget and compensation. Dr. Graham and Dr. Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In our last subcommittee meeting for budget and compensation, which was November 18th, we kicked everything off by going again over all of the salary recommendations that the group had previously agreed on. Had some various conversations around either a stipend or supplement, if you will, for the additional amount attached to the advanced teacher license 4 areas. We had a conversation, a bulk of the meeting was a conversation around professional advancement accounts for the dollars used to use for professional development coursework, whatever it may be, to obtain the licensure requirements for each of these levels. Several numbers were kicked around, but ultimately the group landed on $2,500 for each license level per candidate, for a total of $7,500 to fully receive their license to license 4. We discussed some hold harmless provisions. That's really where we ended everything. DPI will be coming up with some scenarios on just kind of look at what we might be faced with as far as out-of-state teachers or work experience or whatever it may be. And our next meeting will be on December 15th. And pending any questions, that's our subcommittee report. And I don't see Dr. Graham on here, but he may have something to add if he is on here.
All right, any questions for Dr. Fleming? Hearing none, I'd like to just say thank you again to the co-chairs for agreeing to serve as leaders for the subcommittees on this important work. And with that, I would say thank you, commission members, advisors, and staff for your preparation for today's discussions. I remind commission members that our next monthly meeting will be held on Thursday, January 13th, beginning at 9 a.m. We've now completed our meeting, and unless there's additional business, I would ask for a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn, it's Wesley.
Thanks, Wesley. We have a motion. How about a second?
Second, it's Michael.
Thanks. Have a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you, everyone. We're adjourned. Happy holidays.